Welcome to Funny You Say That with Skeptical Scott and Friends. This is a part 2 episode, so if you've not heard Reasonable Rob's part 1, I would pause this and go back. Last time we heard of Rob's fundamentalist Christian background. This is really the pivot point on when that world starts to change. We've talked about, college and career, and I want to bring that spirituality component back in and ask, with that diversity training component, how does that kind of crash into that world?
Crashed into that world with the church that we were attending. I didn't mention previously, I remarried 2001. As a part of that marriage, my wife was also a person of faith, and we would go to church. We went to church for, pretty regularly for a while. At some point, we kind of stopped doing that just because life gets busy, you get things that happen, and we weren't doing that quite as much. But then I learned that a friend of mine from the high school that I went to was actually a pastor on staff at one of the churches that was near where we were living.
Cool.
So we decided, hey, let's go and check it out. And we kind of liked what we saw. It was more modern. It was still very much a fundamental evangelical church, but they had a praise and worship band that was there. They tried to be a little bit more modern with the way that they presented things. They had kind of, I don't want to call it a light show, if you will, yet everything on projectors up on the screen so that people can see and follow along.
I'm totally there because I remember that kind of time period too when all of that was new. I mean, it's kind of normal now, but back then, even a slick looking screen was pretty cool, Anyway.
Yeah, there was a lot of that was there, and it seemed to be a place where we could go, and, they had different services, so we didn't have to go like on Sunday morning. They had a couple of Sunday services. They had a Saturday evening service that we could attend. It got serious enough to the point where we decided, you know what, let's join the church as a family. So we signed up for the membership class, and we were all in. Let's go and do this.
And hey, part of being all in is you're going to step up in your leadership, right? And I'm sure your wife wants to as well, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We wanted to do this together, and we wanted to, set a good example for our kids. It was a family thing where we could do this together. There are things that you hear in some of those types of classes, and in this particular membership class, there was the person that was running it brought up a Bible verse that talked about a woman cannot have authority over a man. You can't teach a man or have any type of authority. That immediately, especially with the diversity training and all of those things that I had learned really recently at that point, I'm like full stop. This is not good.
Timothy was not at the diversity training?
No. Timothy was not there.
So Timothy, I think it's chapter 2, verse 12 is what I see here.
Yeah. And the pure sexism that just emanates from that is something that I really had a hard time with. And I even mentioned it. I wasn't going to make a scene in front of the class or anything like that, but I kind of pulled the guy aside a little bit later and said, hey, wait a minute. You said this about a woman not having authority or teaching a man. Doesn't that seem a little sexist to you? And the explanation that I got was, no, that wasn't sexist at all. That's just kind of the way things were in that time period in the Bible. Further explained it a little bit more, men and women have different gifts. And that role of being a pastor, that's not a gift that a woman has. That's reserved specifically for men.
So I'm hearing both yes and no. I'm hearing, well, that's the way it was back then, so that's why it says that. And so we're going to do a version of that right now. Wow. But hey, I'm sure she would love to serve in the nursery. So, okay.
There was nursery and coffee. Coffee was a big thing at that church as well. So
service with a smile. Okay. But that wasn't like the straw that broke the camel's back. That was just kind of like one of those, right? Like this is how things start on our membership class.
Well, and it's one of those things too, that if you go back even, through the Christian school and through all of the education, you're always taught, don't question God. Don't question God's word. Don't question the Bible. Don't question the pastors that are giving you the word.
Well, you just need to trust like a little kid would trust any adult, you know?
Right.
Don't
And
question.
you're doing that with a completely blind faith. You know, you are putting that trust in God, in Jesus, in that pastor. And it's hard to do that because at this point, obviously there was some cognitive dissonance going on in my brain. That doesn't sound right. Still at that point, I'm willing to push through. I'm willing to continue going there because it seemed to be the right thing to do.
I feel like the pivot point has happened, like you said, with the diversity, like that diversity training probably started it. And so let's kind of carry that forward a few years.
Sure.
You're continuing to learn more, especially like socially, your social groups, but also maybe even your politics. So I guess I want to hear a little bit of that broadening and where you landed.
It actually happened in my career. I'm still, like I said, I'm still a civil servant, but in 2011, I switched divisions within my agency to a different area.
Okay.
And that allowed me to get a bigger perspective of life in general. And it also allowed me to put into practice even more some of the things that I had learned during that diversity conference and some of my experiences, what I had seen since then, particularly with regard to politics. I started leaning more in a progressive direction because I started to see those things where we've got a lot of strength here when we embrace those differences and work together toward the goal. It doesn't have to be Rob's way. It doesn't have to be Jane's way. It doesn't have to be anybody's way. But what happens when all of us get together as a group and put forth the best product? It's amazing.
I'm going to put a economist stand on this. Is going to be weird. We'll see if it works. Okay. But when you hear about investments, how many times have you heard, don't put all your eggs in one basket?
Yes. Yeah. You want to have that diversity in the event that one particular area does not do well.
That's what it kind of makes me think of is when we're awarding or listening to one type of person, we could be missing out on a better performance somewhere else.
Yeah.
We don't even know the strengths we're missing in a lot of ways.
And the thing that's amazing when you bring that up, Scott, is those things that we're seeing there, those stories were very real to me because at that point, it was after going to that conference, I was eventually asked to facilitate some of those conferences myself with another team.
Awesome.
And that really made it even, that just blew everything out of the water. I pretty much stopped listening to Rush Limbaugh and most of the conservative politics at that point because I was seeing the real life examples of other people that were in these conferences that had different stories, different backgrounds than what I did. Man, were they a powerful group.
Yeah.
I started to gain some empathy for that perspective from somebody that has not shared my experiences. Again, that bubble I grew up in, it's a lot bigger at this point.
When we don't know the full breadth of humanity and backgrounds and gifts and depth, all of that. Yeah. Okay. So I guess keep going now. And then I think we're going to end up tying this together, both kind of, the things you're told not to talk about, politics and religion, right?
Politics and religion.
That's the beauty of a podcast where both people are anonymous, right? We get to talk about it. But hey, I do hope this underscores for people who are listening, though, that kind of take it for granted what they get to talk about at any given moment, that it's risky for people like us, even in our employment and friendships and family and all of that. So again, I just want to say thank you for sharing with us. Let's go ahead and carry forward maybe 2016. So the first Trump presidency, maybe I'll put it that way, because I think that was groundbreaking for a lot of people. And I think, by the way, I think that's happening again. You know how church membership has been going down for decades, right?
Right.
There was a big dip in 2016. And I think there's another one happening now, in my opinion. And I think it has to do with the cognitive dissonance that you and I both and others are experiencing when we see a group say the words but not walk the walk.
Right. And that was right around that time where, obviously, with Trump being elected, that was really different because it didn't mesh for me here's what I'm seeing in my real world right now with all of these people that have different backgrounds. They're coming together. They're solving problems. They're doing some things that are really making a difference. And I'm seeing, especially from Republican politicians, that that's not necessarily where things were going. I mean, even before that, the Affordable Health Care Act, right? Obamacare.
Right.
Who wouldn't want universal coverage for everybody in the country?
Foundational need, right?
Yeah. And it took a couple of people to stand up and vote with the Democrats to keep that program in place. I don't have a lot of great things to say about John McCain, but the one thing that I will say is when he gave that thumbs down, right, and voted that down along with a couple of his other Republican colleagues, that's when I knew I can't do this anymore. You know, seeing all of those things together. So that's what I can't stand for. But now what do I stand for? You've got two different things, the religion and the politics. So I decided to get back into the word.
There's a desperation there, right? There's I got to figure this out. Yeah.
Because that cognitive dissonance was real. Very much so. And even back in that elementary school, one of the verses that we learned as a memory verse was a verse that was in 2 Timothy. And it's the one that talks about all scripture being God-breathed or given by inspiration of God. And it's able to be used for, to doctrine, for reproof, for several things. It's supposed to be, when it says it there, it's good to go. Okay. And that was what I decided to do. I'm going to take that and I'm going to run with that. I'm going to dig in a little bit more and see how this might be able to help me.
Yeah, I can't listen to these Republicans. I need to listen to this book. I need to see what it says because it's God-breathed. It's his word.
Yeah. And that's what I was hoping for. That's really what I was hoping for.
Clarity? You're hoping for clarity.
Unfortunately, that's not what I found. What I found was a whole lot of stories that I had never heard before. Some things that, especially from Old Testament, that never seem to be preached about because they're horrible stories.
What are some of your favorites?
Well, when you're talking about, God saying to kill an entire group of people, particularly in like Deuteronomy and Numbers in that area, that means that God is ordering a lot of people to be killed. And that doesn't sound like a good thing. Or maybe where the rape victim has to marry her attacker. God commands that happen in the book of Deuteronomy. That just blew my mind when I started to reading some of those things. Because you're always, God is omnipotent. God is benevolent. God is a good God. God is a just God. And what I was finding was that doesn't seem to be quite the case. In fact, there are some things that are even there where they can't happen. You can't have a donkey that speaks in human language, right? You can't have somebody die and then be raised from the dead 3 days later. That doesn't happen.
And it's funny too, is that a lot of people don't realize this, but there were many more people resurrected than Jesus in the Bible.
Yeah.
The parts that were never said at your school, like, we're going to gloss right over that part, right? I obviously, I'm not an expert in the Bible, but I do remember reading one of the versions that said that people came out of their graves.
Yeah.
And walked around town, and it's like, wow, really?
And you would think that that would be something that would be like huge and written down and recorded like in history somewhere other than in the Bible. But that's the place that you find it. I
remember when I first read that, Rob, I was like, did they continue living, or did they just kind of dance around for a second and then drop to the ground? Like,
right. Because
you would think if they kept living that there would be tons of stories of, I was one of those people in the grave. And now I got to have a family, and it's
right.
Strange. But anyway, so what you're saying here though is that a lot of fantastical stories. What about the people who say though, well, that was Old Testament. That was angry God. That was the angry God, so, but now Jesus is here. I mean, right. I've certainly run into that.
Well, and the interesting thing there is if you look in the book of Matthew, Jesus is being quoted. And he goes back to Old Testament prophecy to be a part of this, but you think of Jesus and God being a God of peace, a God of love. And what Jesus actually says there is, do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword.
Yeah.
For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against his mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. And anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Now, I want to just think about that for a moment, because family is one of the things that is most important to me. And you're telling me Jesus said, if I don't love him more than I love my family,
if you don't love this idea of a person that you can't see, that doesn't talk to you, if you don't love that entity more than you love the flesh and blood that you live with every day, that you're pouring into every day.
Yeah. And it's just one of those things that,
head scratcher.
For sure. And it's one of those that still, look in the New Testament. Well, how do we reconcile that? There's something about, if that is God and if that is Jesus, there's something that is just not meshing there. There's so much contradiction that I finally said, I can't sort this out. It doesn't stand up to just basic critical analysis where, can this happen? Can a donkey talk to a human? No. But yet it's recorded that they can. A virgin cannot give birth to a child. Resurrection. The prophet, Elijah, one of those Old Testament prophets having people raising from the dead. That can't happen.
Living 900 years.
Yeah, right. I can't do it, and I couldn't do it. That cognitive dissonance was so real that I just had to set it aside and decide, you know what, I can't do this anymore because it's not right.
Andrew Seidel, right?
Yeah.
And I know I had a recent episode with the Unquestionable Calvin. I know he brought this up too. It's a quote that I frequently fall on now, that it goes something like this: the road to atheism. Do you know the rest? The road to atheism
begins with reading the Bible.
Yes, is littered with Bibles that have been read cover to cover.
Yeah.
So you're saying this was the moment that when you turned to it for real answers because of the dissonance you were seeing politically, instead you went, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
You said that kind of ended it for you.
Yep.
Was that inwardly that you said, I don't believe this stuff?
Yes. It was very much inward.
So it is. It's more of that realization. I think I got to put this down. Then what happens?
Oh, crap.
Yeah.
What am I going to tell my wife? What am I going to tell my family? What am I going to tell people that I've known for years that we've had this faith background? It was a tough decision because I'm now holding on to that. I've got it's something that's a secret that I'm struggling with myself because I don't dare talk to other people about that. And that's not a good place to be in.
Here's what's funny. I don't want to say it's funny. I mean, this show is called Funny You Say That, right? It's funny that you say you had all this dissonance, so you had to put it down. But now you have a wholly different dissonance going on. You've got this, here's who I am privately, here's who I am publicly, and that is also dissonance.
Yeah.
And that's anxiety. That's stressful.
The biggest part from that was feeling kind of alone.
Yeah.
Right. The one thing that churches do in particular, even if you're not like a regular every week attending services, you have a community. Even if you're not going to a church, if you say, hey, I'm a Christian, it's very likely you're going to find other Christians in your community.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem as likely to me that you're finding that with somebody that is no longer a believer. And that was the really scary part.
You don't even have to know the person's name. You could say I'm a Christian and you can get a high five.
Yeah. Even with that all being the case, I had to be true to myself, I had to say something to my wife. I knew that I was not going to be able to keep that. And she was somewhat surprised, but she was also very supportive in that, this is your journey. I'm going to support you any way that I can. And I know that I'm very, very lucky there.
you and I are both lucky in that regard. And it took me quite a while for me to voice that. I had the same response, luckily. And
that's one thing that I love so much about my wife is that we are able to have somewhat difficult conversation. I mean, that was a difficult conversation for me to have. And yet, even if she didn't understand where it was coming from, she still had my back. And that's huge.
One of the most important people in your life. I mean, that's awesome. Yeah.
The same way I would have her back in a difficult situation like that. So that was good. So I was able to tell her. I was able to tell other folks in my immediate family, and that's kind of where it stopped for quite a while.
Well, at least you got your main people. Yeah. You got your important people right there. And you certainly don't want to threaten everything at once, I guess, or career or friendships and all of that. So, and speaking of career, I know it continued to do well. It's going well today. We can thank your career for the diversity training. I think we can also thank, I guess, the ways you've grown in your roles at your career on how you talk to people. And I want to tie this, Rob, to that podcast that you and I brought up earlier as a joke. But I was listening as well right around the same time to Dogma Debate with David C. Smalley. And some people find him controversial for whatever reasons. I guess I don't know all the history there, but I know that it hit me at a good time to be listening to him. What do you think it was about that show? And how does that tie to your career a bit too?
Sure. Well, that particular show was the first thing that I ever picked up in trying to find that sense of community. I didn't want to say the A word as being an atheist.
Yeah.
That was a scary thing, but I also wanted to try to figure out, okay, if that is truly where I'm at, maybe I need to see if I can find a sense of community there. And that was the first podcast that I bumped into. Listening to David C. Smalley talk to people that disagreed with him very strongly. They had it's called Dogma Debate because the guest would be invited on the show to talk about something that they feel very strongly, they have a very strong opinion about, and they just have a conversation around that.
Mm-hmm.
When we're talking about those, like religion, politics, you don't have those conversations. Well, that's exactly the type of conversation that David C. Smalley would have. Yeah. And he would do it respectfully. That was the thing that just absolutely blew my mind, because here I'm thinking that every single stereotype that you would hear about an atheist.
Yeah, angry atheist, right? Angry atheists who they're unhappy people. They've just got to pop everyone's balloon, right?
Yes. And that was not what I found with David C. Smalley.
Right.
He was respectful. He did something that I later learned it was called Rappaport's Rules or Dennett's Rules.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a way to have a conversation with somebody where you're truly listening to that person and trying to understand them. It's empathic listening is really what it is.
Yeah.
And where that ties into my career is learning that skill and hearing it and seeing it on that podcast. When I professionally started to learn some of those same skills in a style of communication with other people where you are helping them to resolve their own issues and helping them to sort through their own issues instead of telling them what they need to do about those issues. It's more of an empathic thing there. You're trying to understand where they're coming from instead of telling them, hey, dummy, do this.
It's pretty
Don't
awesome,
you know you should be doing that?
Yeah,
that doesn't go well.
It's a gift when you have somebody who has the gift of listening, where it's like, well, what do I mean about that? I guess I mean that. Yeah, that's what I mean. And with David C. Smalley, it's not that he caves in. It's called Dogma Debate, right? But he's going to start with understanding it. And can he communicate your position in his words in a way that you say, yes, that's what I mean. You know, so that's where that understanding comes in. But then to ask a challenging question, I mean, that's kind of where the magic happens.
Right.
Yeah.
And even if we disagree about whatever the thing is, can we find some type of understanding there, or is there a piece that we both agree on?
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
There's something about the way that he communicated with people on that podcast that really drew me in, because that's exactly what I was trying to do professionally. I want to understand you, and then let's talk around that. Let's talk through whatever the issue is.
Why do you think it is that a lot of his guests would come back?
My guess is it's the same thing.
It's hard to not say yes to a respectful conversation.
Right. And that's the thing that he did so well, was maintain that level of dignity and respect. Even if we vehemently disagree about whatever the thing is, we can have a conversation, and hopefully I can understand more about your perspective. You know, maybe you'll understand a little bit more about mine. That's great. But I want to understand you first.
That's pretty awesome.
And that's huge.
What's funny about that too, and sorry we keep talking about David C. Smalley over and over again, but you also know he's a comedian, and
yes.
he can absolutely turn up the heat and be disrespectful and funny for the laugh.
No doubt.
Right? So again, to kind of know that he's so skilled in that, you and I as listeners sit back going, man, that was good.
Yeah, he's really good at understanding that other person and then giving it back to them in a way that they may continue that conversation. Instead of, wait a minute, you said what? You know, you expect that, again, the angry atheist or something like that, and that's just not the way that he does business. And his guests, they come back. They were doing that relatively consistently, including religious people, like religious pastors and teachers.
Yeah.
That was something that really helped me at that time with that sense of community. I realized, you know what? I'm not alone. I don't care what I've heard about atheists. I don't care about all of those preconceived notions that I have. Now we got to make the rubber meet the road. Can you put that into practice yourself? Can you try to understand somebody that might be in a different position or a different place than where you are now? And professionally, that's what I need to be able to do. Personally, that's also what I need to be able to do, because with all of the division that is going on right now, I need to be able to understand that other person is a human being. It's
hard, man.
It is. It's very hard, because the reality is, in a lot of cases, I was that other person.
I know.
Right?
I know.
What would happen if I came at that person, or if somebody had come at me back then the way that I would really want to come after somebody? It's not going to go well. So instead, can we do something that we might work towards something that we have in common? Right? That's where the humanism comes in, where that other person is a human being, first and foremost.
Funny You Say That is a proud affiliate for the Secular Alliance of Michigan. If you are a Michigander or somewhere nearby, you're not alone. There are a number of affiliates under the Secular Alliance who are dedicated to supporting non-religious individuals. They are advancing evidence-based solutions and projects throughout our state. Affiliates like the Black Non-Believers of Detroit, Michigan Atheists, Skeptics on the Move, and more. Go to secularalliance.org. You'll find a real community, one who helps us defend the separation of church and state. For our listeners who are kind of new to all this, you know, you hear agnostic, you hear agnostic atheist, you hear atheist, you hear secular humanist. And just to kind of very quickly broaden that out, I go ahead now and say I'm atheist, even though technically I would say I'm agnostic atheist. Meaning, I don't think there is a God, I just don't see evidence for it. I'm open for some evidence, and that's the agnostic part. Like, we don't know, and we might not ever know. The secular humanist part is kind of where you're going right now, in terms of this person's a human. This is humanity. And people don't usually change their mind in one conversation. So I better treat them well. if there's any chance of us understanding and moving forward together. What I'm seeing here, and I guess where we're heading, we're aligning. That dissonance you were feeling for years is becoming more aligned.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. So let's go ahead then and talk about where you are today and how, you know, how a lot of times people think that you need a God to be moral or morality. I hate it when they say this, when they say, well, that's not objective. Your own morality is not objective. You need God's standard. And I'm like,
yeah.
Well, we're all freaking trying to interpret what God meant, and that in itself becomes subjective. You know, it's like,
right.
What in the world, right? So you've come up with, I guess, what you want to stand for. Would that be fair to say?
It is. Because the labels that I have landed with for myself, I'm in that same boat with you as far as being an agnostic atheist. I don't know. I haven't seen enough evidence to support any type of a theism, but I'm open to any type of evidence, right?
Yeah.
And then that other piece as well, the secular humanist, is where I really see myself, because I want to connect with people as the human beings that they are. There are ways to be able to do that. I really had to, like when I first started that deconstruction of the former worldview that I had and of the Christianity piece, I didn't really know a whole lot about atheism other than it was bad. And I definitely didn't know a lot about secular humanism. But that was another term that I heard from David C. Smalley. Mm-hmm. And what I found was, in digging into that a little bit more, where we're looking at a kind of a naturalistic philosophy, ethics that are more consequential in nature, as opposed to coming from a deity of some type. Mm-hmm. That's really where I have kind of landed. That's where my professional principles lie. That's where my personal principles lie. You know, I'm excited about that for the first time. You know, like the last few years, it's been like an awakening that I am free from all of that stuff that I was programmed with for so many years. And I'm excited about that. But yet, you know, you're using my first name today on purpose, and we're not getting specific about employment because that's not something that I want to have those conversations, particularly at work, right? I don't go to work to be proselytized by somebody else. And I really don't think that they would want to be hearing my perspective on religion or on my worldview like that in that same way, because those worlds collide, right?
Yeah.
You know, I have a few colleagues that I've been able to do that. They're more like personal friends. And friendship is a lot different than being colleagues at work.
For sure.
There are a few that I'm able to share that information with. But as far as, you know, generally at work, that's just something that I'm not willing to put out there for that very reason. I don't think it's an appropriate topic at work. It would make me uncomfortable if somebody were to come at me about their worldview. I don't want to
and yet
come at somebody else like that.
I know.
It does.
I know it does for me too. It does all the time. And again, people take it for granted that they can. Yep. But you know what we can do, Rob? So we just talked about labels, secular humanist, atheist, all of that stuff, right? We've talked about labels. And so while we're not going to necessarily always share our labels to others for whatever reason, we can act our beliefs.
Ooh, yes.
After all, isn't that what if we're truly saying these things, I'm kind, I want to be just, I want all of those things, then I can show them in my actions. I don't have to tell people about them. Yeah.
And that's where I really broke down that piece for me, was where I was looking at, what do you stand for? And then, you know, if you know the why behind that, then you're going to have a lot more impact going forward.
Yes.
And I loved when you started off the show with doing the right thing for the right reason. You know, that's kind of the principle that I have adopted, to say, this is how I want to be with other people. And it's not always easy to do that.
It's not, but it's so powerful, man. Because people, I mean, I know it's a glib saying, people won't remember what they say, but they'll always remember how you treat them feel. how you,
Yeah.
how you made them feel is what I meant to say there.
Right.
And so that's kind of how we can quote unquote show who we are.
Yeah.
And I think just in our shorter interactions here that I see that in you for sure. That's where some of the freedom comes too, is that we have voiced it to ourselves, the principles and values that are important to us, so that when tough things happen, it's not a tough choice for us because we've already identified it. We just don't have to talk about it. We can just do it, you know? And so would you say, I'm just going to ask you then, what it boils down to, who's Rob?
When it comes to who I've chosen to be, I've got 4 principles. I've written them down, and I keep them written down on purpose because it's a way to keep myself grounded, right?
Yeah.
If you say you want to do the right thing for the right reason, here is what you can actually do, right? That's why I'm going to do that. There's a comedian, a Christian comedian named Michael Jr. He says, when you know your why, your what has much more impact, because now you're walking with your purpose when you know that what. So my what is very simple. Number 1, it's empathy. It's being kind to other people, even when I disagree with who they are or things that they espouse. I still want to be kind to that person. Now, I didn't say nice. I said kind, because I think to me, and it may be splitting hairs, there is a difference between those.
You know how, who is it? Brene Brown says, clear is kind, meaning like sometimes I have to tell you a hard truth, but I can still be kind about it. Whereas I'm just being nice. I don't have to tell you that. You know,
right.
I can just like put a smile on my face and then you walk away and then I'm like, oh, what an asshole, you know, or whatever. Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry to jump in there, but I absolutely
that's
see it.
Perfect. That's exactly it. Another one is just being the best human being that I can be.
Mm-hmm.
And the best way, I think, for me to be able to really do that is be kind to people and meet them where they're at. And this is also important, not where I want them to be.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I may see some potential in somebody that maybe they don't see it themselves yet. I need to meet that person where they're at right now and be able to deal with them and have good interactions with them where they are right now. If they change and do some things differently, where they move in a different direction, that's awesome. But then it's them that did that. It's not me.
Hell yeah.
I want to be kind and meet them where they are actually at.
I just love that you say humanity, human being. It there's a humility in that, as that this is where I'm at. I'm gonna screw up. So are you. So what's important to you?
Yeah.
Cool.
Another principle, another piece of the what there is things like justice, fairness, and equity. Those things matter, and you got to be able to speak up when it comes to difficult things that are happening. I mean, even now, we've talked that, you know, there's a lot of difficult things going on right now politically. But when you're seeing racism, sexism, women's healthcare being under attack, DEI issues that are under attack right now.
A middle school student being bullied.
Yes, that's it.
Right? You think back to that. You're like, why wouldn't somebody speak up? Yeah. I think we know why they don't speak up, but you know what I'm saying is that if I truly care about somebody, then I wouldn't let that go.
Right. And that's something that I've got to be able to continue to do. Now, am I going to be the activist that's marching to the Capitol and doing things of that? That's not where I see myself right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But where I do see myself is being able to potentially financially support organizations and groups that stand for things that I believe in. Even if my physical presence, if I can't do it that way, I can do it in other ways. I can be a support to somebody that's going through a rough time. Those types of things. So that's where I'm at there. And then the last one, Scott, is, I'm sure we probably share this. This is the only life that I've got. I'm not counting on an afterlife. I want it to count for something now, rather than waiting for heaven, rather than waiting for some reward in the future. Make it happen now. Be real with people now. Interact with people now the way that they want to interact with you, right? Not the way I want to interact with them necessarily, but if I know something about this person and I know that this is how they want to interact with me, meet them at that level. Make it as much as I can, understanding where that other person is at. So that's kind of where, worldview-wise, that's where I'm at.
Is there anything else you would like our listeners to know as we wrap things up?
Well, it's nice to be able to talk with my immediate family about these types of issues at this point and how I've made some choices and how I'm seeing the world at this point. I can't say that about everybody that's in my family. There are some, siblings, for example, that I have not been able to have a discussion like that yet. I just don't feel comfortable to have those conversations yet. I'm hoping that's going to come at some point, because what I'd really like to have is that peace.
Yeah.
When you're talking about trying to understand somebody else without trying to change them, sometimes absence of conflict is the best you're going to get. And
True.
I have to be okay with that. And that's a bit of a hard lesson sometimes, but yet I'm okay with it. I would rather have that absence of conflict and be able to stand being around each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, I think a lot of our listeners are there. So I totally get it. Well, in conclusion, Rob, I want to thank you for your honesty today, your relatability. I know for me, for you, for many of our listeners, we understand what it's like to weigh the cost of being our true selves. Thank you for your authenticity and recognizing too that, kind of back to where you said earlier, when you felt alone, listeners, you're not alone. And Rob and I found each other at Detroit Assembly, where we find, wow, look, there's a big group here of people who go by their first name sometimes. There's an exhale. It's refreshing, but and certainly online. I want to ask you about that, Rob. Have there been any other spaces where you've felt some camaraderie? Yeah,
there's a couple. In fact, you mentioned Sunday Assembly. That's been a wonderful sense of community. I'm going to back up one from there, though. I never would have heard about Sunday Assembly had I not attended my first atheist conference in Sarnia, Ontario. BajaCon is something that Bob Barnes and his tremendous team over there have put together for this coming year. Is going to be the fourth year in a row.
Plug it, because when this show comes out, when this show comes out, I'm going to guess it'll be about a month away or something like that. So let's plug that.
Absolutely. That is in August. I believe it's August 8th, 9th, and 10th in Sarnia, Ontario. That conference is where I met many other like-minded people. That was where I ran into Steve.
Yes.
Both Steve and Austin from Detroit Sunday Assembly over there. They're like, hey, you can come and join us. Okay, let me do that.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So, yes, that is one place that I've been able to do that. There's been some other podcasters, Seth Andrews. Yeah. I really have an affinity for him because
he's so good.
He's the Thinking Atheist, he's the person behind the Thinking Atheist website and podcast. He has some things in common with me as well, including the broadcast background and the ACE school. So it's just another place to be able to know that you're not alone.
And I think the title of his book says it all too: Confessions of a Former Fox News Christian.
Yeah.
He was in the radio world. He was in the conservative side. So I can totally see the parallels between his story and yours.
Yep.
Oh, hey, wait, I hear the music. You know what time it is.
We think it's real important to question what you know before you leave this podcast. It's the skeptic of the show.
Today's skeptic is exactly who Rob's been talking about. The Golden Voice. Mr. Seth Andrews, host of The Thinking Atheist. Born to an Oklahoman Baptist family, Seth used to be a fundamentalist Christian talk show host. He eventually came to the conclusion that he, quote, had been living an inherited belief system and that the Bible is unsustainable scientifically, historically, and morally, unquote. Today, he's an atheist podcaster, activist, author, and speaker. Hear this quote regarding intelligent design.
Our sun causes cancer. We've got blind creatures with eyes, deaf creatures with ears, flightless birds with wings, heavy bones in flying animals, pelvises in whales, redundant RNA, wisdom teeth, men with nipples. Someone explain this to me.
Check our show notes to see Seth's entire brilliant talk on the lack of intelligent design in a video from last year's Baja Con. Seth will be up in Sarnia, Ontario again for the conference this August.
And I will tell you one other group that I have found community with, and it's one that I haven't lost community with. There were 4 friends, myself included, with 3 other guys in college that were just tight the entire time when we were in college. We were, at the time, at that Christian college, right?
Yeah.
3 of the 4 of us at this point have abandoned our formerly strong faith. To have that sense of community with people that have been in the same place that I was, physically and all of that during the college years, it's led to some really good conversations.
That's awesome.
After the fact.
The friendship there is what the important value there. And then the tightness of being yourselves. How cool.
Yeah, very much so. And I have one other person that I think is important. I'm not going to mention her by name, but a professional colleague of mine that is also a friend. I've known her for 25 plus years. She's really become my mentor in certain areas professionally. She and I are on different sides of the fence when it comes to religion. But man, do we have a lot of things in common when it comes to empathy, when it comes to finding the humanity in somebody else that may have different perspectives. And I am so grateful that she is still in my life as well. After all of these years professionally, that's an amazing thing. So I've got a good community with me.
Dude, that's great. Thanks for joining us again. And I'm going to end it with a short statement that I think kind of sums this up. Okay?
Okay.
I don't care so much about who you believe in. I want you to move the W on the word who. I do care how you believe. So let's move the W.
Wow, that's deep. I love it.
Oh, shoot. Well, hey, I can't wait to see you face to face, and I wish it was at Baja Con. That just happens to be the busiest 2 weeks of my work, which means I could be anywhere in the country. But if it's on the east side of Michigan, I'm going to find a way to go across the bridge.
There you go. I am still in the Michigan area, so we'll definitely make sure at some point.
We'll make it happen.
We'll make it happen.
And if you come to the west side, let's have dinner.
Sounds good.
All right. Peace out.
Appreciate you, Scott. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for listening to some stories at Funny You Say That with Skeptical Scott and friends. Find all of our episodes and ways to connect at skepticalscott.com. Our intro music was created by my friend Jimmy Dells of the Internet Explorer podcast. Any other music or sound effects were provided by this week's co-host, Artie Fisher.
Have a question? Interested in being a guest on our show? Or you just want to share a part of your questimony? Email us at heyskepticalscott@gmail.com.
Drop the supernatural, embrace the rational, believe in as many true things as possible.
Otherwise, you may end up believing in something that is even more artificial than me.
See you every first and third Friday. May skeptical thoughts be with you.
And also with you.
Cheers.